और सोशल साइंटिस्ट के तौर पर भी जाने जाते हैं। मैं आपका भी स्वागत करता हूं और हमारे टुडेज थर्ड स्पीकर इज प्रोफेसर एराक बारूचा, डायरेक्टर ऑफ भारतीय विद्यापीठ इंस्टीट्यूट ऑफ एनवायरमेंटल एजुकेशन एंड रिसर्च। आई ऑल्सो वेलकम यू सर। हमारे जो आज के लास्ट जो स्पीकर है वो है डॉक्टर समीर बैनर्जी, और आप एक गांधीयन स्कॉलर है और आप पर्यावरणीय विषयों से विशेष रूप से जुड़े हुए हैं। मैं आप सभी का वेलकम करता हूं और मेरा सभी पार्टिसिपेंट से रिक्वेस्ट है कि आप लोग अब कृपया करके ऑडियो और वीडियो को ऑफ रखें ताकि डिस्टरबेंस न हो मीटिंग के दौरान। और अब मैं इस वेबिनार की श्रृंखला को आगे बढ़ाते हुए डॉक्टर दीप्ति पांडे मैम को आमंत्रित करता हूं। धन्यवाद।
Good afternoon, everybody. I feel really nice. We all really feel nice to be back again on this forum, on this platform, once again, to deliberate upon from where we left yesterday. And all the speakers are here, most of the attendees are here, and I welcome you once again. And it is our proud privilege to be having very distinguished speakers again with us on the online platform. I first and foremost wish to thank Professor Badri Narayan for his spontaneous acceptance of this invitation for the webinar. Distinguished as a social historian and cultural anthropologist, he is presently the director of GB Pant Social Science Institute, Allahabad. Professor Badri Narayan's interests range from popular culture to social and anthropological history, Dalit and subaltern issues, and the relationship between power and culture. Being a man of myriad interests, surely the situation faced by the world today and thereby worlds to come would not have escaped his serious contemplation. The relationship between environment, popular culture and folk traditions, and marginalized communities has been a relevant theme in the realm of social sciences. And who could be a better person than Professor Badri Narayan to delve on it today with us? More so because he is well versed in the use of non-conventional resources such as oral traditions, folklore, and popular prints, etc. As coordinator, Manav Vikas Sangrahalaya, GB Pant Institute, Allahabad, his key role in various projects around Ganga River culture and Videsiya migration projects bear testimony to this fact. Here, I would like to include that only last year, we, along with our students, the Department of History students, had visited this institute, and not only were we given a very warm welcome by the faculty and the staff, and we felt very at home at that place, and also there was a lot of learning, lots and lots of learning which we could carry with us. And then all through the session, in various forms, we utilized the understanding that we had developed, and our students presented a number of presentations and included it in their various assignments and activities. So I'm really grateful personally also to Professor Badri Narayan for the help that was extended to us and to our students last year. A recipient of various national and international fellowships ranging from ICHR, ICSSR, and IIAS Shimla, fellowships to Fulbright, Royal Tropical Institute Amsterdam, and the Institute for Social and Science Research Suriname are just a few to name. Professor Badri Narayan has an impressive list of published output to his credit. We, of course, due to the dearth of time, cannot delve upon it. Although there's much more to be said, but since time is a constraint, I would now request our distinguished speaker to come up and share his views with all of us. Professor Badri Narayan.
Thank you. Thanks to you, and thanks to Vasanta College for inviting me to take part in this webinar, and the kind word which you spoke for us. We are really thankful to you. When I was talking to Dipti ji, I told, why we are doing like this? It would have been better to come to Vasanta College and deliver lecture there. But we are compelled to do in this form because, and who compelled us? This epidemics, pandemics. And so this form is also produced by a compulsion. And how compulsion create form of communication, you can see. And I begin, I'll tell you one very short story, which tells similar kinds of experience. Picasso is an eminent painter, as you know, and he painted this piece, Santi Kapoth. And when he was painting that Kapoth, and Nazi forces entered in that, and then they asked, who made it? He said, you made it. Then they asked, why you were saying you made it? He said, because you have done a lot of operation on us. That's why I produce these kinds of symbol and metaphor. So this epidemics is a kind of compulsion which created a form of communication in which we are discussing this issue. Let me come to this topic, and this is a very pertinent topic to think in contemporary time. But I'm not the expert of environmental history, but I would like to trace this genesis of the making of this crisis and its relation with the environment through two trajectories. One trajectory is popular culture, and other trajectory is the colonialism and modernity. You know, this modernity and colonialism sometimes went together, and they formed a kind of world, and that world is modern world, what we call modern world. And this modernity, which we call an aggressive modernity, created imbalance in society, in which they brought human man in the center, and they put all the things around man. So man exploited everything. Nature, environment, animals, they all were exploited by human. Human, I'm not using this term human because when you exploit something, you don't become human. You became merely a exploiter body. So this exploiter body, which is produced by modernity, which taught us to consume, to exploit, to use everything. And in this way, colonialism worked, produced a philosophy of life and a kind of lifestyle, culture, and that is based on modernity. And this taught us to exploit everything and create imbalance in the society. So modernity creates imbalance in the society, and this modernity traveled with the colonialism. And traveling with the, I'm not saying this modernity, I'm talking this colonial modernity which came India through colonialism also taught us to make a life which is based on exploitation, which is based on extractions, which is based on over use of the entire resources of human society. And how it happened, you know better than me because you are a historian and you teach history. One of the very eminent historian of India, Prof. in one of his study, he has used Bengali memoirs of a village. So I was telling that how modernity, which traveled with colonialism, or created a philosophy which taught us to use and exploit everything of the human resources, extract everything for the benefit of the man-centered man itself. And this created a society based on imbalance, in which we have exploited and extracted natural resources, animals, birds, trees, everything. And how it came, it also traveled with colonialism and came to India. And when it came to India, it came in Bengal. And one of the eminent historian of India, Partha Chatterjee, In one of his study, he talks about a Bengali memoir in which he talks about the village of 250 years ago. In that village, there was no illness. No? People used to cure their illness by themselves, by their own herbal medicines or village medicines. There was no term herbal there, village medicines. And they were the people were living very good health in that village, and it's a memoir about that village. But when colonialism came, they colonize our body, and they also colonize our food habits. And in that process, you must have read very interesting study of Gautam Bhadra, how tea became a national drink. And in that he said how Britishers allured us to drink tea, और उसमें कई बार they used to distribute tea freely without any paisa, no? So through that they created greed, a habit among us about the tea. So in this way they change our food habit, and when they change our food habit, they also change our food pattern, crop pattern. The kind of food used to produce, crops used to produce in the villages, they have changed it entirely, the pattern of crops in India. So they colonized our mind, body, they colonized our food habit, they colonized our mind, and through that, even soul, but soul is still saved from this kind of entrance of the colonial ideology within ourselves. But other things of outer side of our body and habit, they were widely influenced by the colonialism. So in that way, they change our entire ecology, because when they changed, they inspired us, or they pushed us to change our food habit. They pushed us to change our food pattern, food crops pattern. This also changed the entire ecology. And then, you know, this colonialism, they earned a lot of money through the industrialization, process of industrialization, modernization, what they call modernization. They were positive aspect of modernization, but also this modernization, like when railway introduced in India, or when they made factories here. They cut the forest trees in a big way, and through that they disbalanced our ecology of the forest, and through that we got trains, because earlier you used to take 2 months to walk to Kolkata from Allahabad to Kolkata, but now you can go in 10 hours or 12 hours, or maybe overnight. That benefit we got, but in that process we also lost our many things. So we got something, but we missed many things. We lost many things. So that's the pattern of colonialism and modernity, in which you get something, some privilege, you get some facility, which is immediate facility, which can give you immediate relief, but you lost many things. In this process, this ecology, and the entire ecological policies, environmental policies of the colonial India, if you see, use water, the process to use water, this policies towards rivers, the policies towards forests, they were all used on one theory, that is to use for the use for the human society, for providing privilege and the providing a kind of comfort in the life. That's very good comfort we all want, but in that process we lost our ecological balance, and that ecological balance is very important for human life. And you know, all the epidemics which human society observed in not only in India, in all over the world, it produced because of two things. One is because of colonial aspirations to travel for colonizing world. Like when these sailors, they used to go to other countries to understand the kind of resource mapping, to do resource mapping in those days, and they became the first bearer of epidemics. they brought epidemics and they disseminated epidemics to the various countries, to the country of their homeland. So I used to tell that epidemics travels through the society or a community which has a capacity to travel, and capacity to travel was in those days with the community who were the community of colonizers, because they had a ship, they had a training to run the ships, and in that process they were the first a kind of first level of bearers of or disseminator of the epidemics. So epidemics is also produced of this kind of colonial intercourse, colonial interaction with the various kinds of human lands or land of the various society of the world, and through that they brought it and they disseminated to the poorest to poorest to the India or to the any country. Like in India, you see this Vardhaman fever. This is flu, no, and plague. They also came with army troopers, colonial army troopers. They travel with them and from one part to another part of India. And Indian society received those epidemics. I'm not saying it's only because of they are the only cause, but they are the one of the very important cause of dissemination of the pandemics or epidemics in any society of the society of the colonized. And colonized society received those pandemics. Most of the pandemics in India came during colonial time, came in Bengal, and they disseminated from Bengal because of their colonial interaction, their interaction with the colonial agencies, merchants, colonial troopers, army troopers, and various kinds of social agency which came through the colonialism. So this is the second point. And the third point is how we responded to the pandemics and to create balance with these pandemics. You know, in Indian, what we call this is modernity. You know, this is modernity, which is the modernity emerged through our saints, Kabir, Ravidas, various kinds of saints, Shiv Narayan, and which emerged through folk culture. You know, our folk culture is, I call, is a more has a sense of modernity. Modernity not in colonial way, but in Desha's way, and this taught us to live with the nature and to don't create this balance in the relationship with the human, the environment, and the birds and the animal life. And there are a lot of folk songs about that. You must have heard there is a folk songs in villages which our women used to sing. That वो अपने बाबा से कहती है लड़की कि ये जो पेड़ है इसको मत काटिएगा, इस पेड़ पर चिड़िया का बसेरा होता है। तो ये जो चिड़िया का बसेरा है, इसके कारण पेड़ नहीं काटने का जो रिक्वेस्ट है, ये हमारे यहाँ का एक जो ecological consciousness which is deeply rooted in our culture, that is represented in this kind of folk songs. And you know, if you remember village lifestyle, it's how it begin from the morning to evening, and how trees are important in that. The kind of purity or pollution, not in the caste term, but in the term of the body, between body and body. घर की सफाई, गोबर से पोतना घर को, राख से बर्तन को मांजना. No, these are all part of our lifestyle. This Desha's modernity taught us to create balance between various kinds of stakeholders of society and make a peaceful and disease-free life. So diseases came with these kinds of aspirations, which aspiration to become mobile. It's like you must have seen this corona. Corona first of all came by whom? It traveled with the frequent flyers, and these frequent flyers brought it and gave it to the people those who are living in the slums, Dharavi, and the migrants, and they are bringing these diseases with them. So the capacity to become mobile always comes to the people who are economically better, and they first of all receive these kinds of diseases, and they are the bearers of modernity, and modernity which create crisis in our lifestyle, in our life culture. And so in this way, I'm not blaming a section of society, but I'm saying talking about the process through which diseases come in India. The colonialism came in India. They created disbalance in our society. They created a condition in which diseases emerged: plague, chichak, pox, smallpox, lot of pandemics which our society has realized or experienced. Uh, the one is this Desha's modernity, which taught us to create balance in the nature, with the relationship with the nature and society. How? One, I talked about few songs. The entire culture to respond these pandemics in India is based on the folk experience of creating balance between various stakeholders of the society. How? Like when this plague emerged in Kolkata, in Bengal, there is a villages near Bengal, Kolkata, and the first of all plague in India, which was called Indian plague, in all over the world. It disseminated in various parts of the world. Uh, there is a debate whether it's originated from the India or it originated from some other place and came to India. Anyway, we are not going to involve in that. I'm just telling you when this emerged, Indian plague emerged, then how society responded to it. There is a deity emerged near Bengal, and this deity was called Ola Bibi. The name of the deity was Ola Bibi, and this pandemics was called in Bengali Ola Otha. So Ola Bibi, I was talking about Ola Bibi, and Ola Bibi was the worship of Ola Bibi was not only a reflection of the belief of Andhvishwas, which we call in India, but also Britishers, they used to trust on her, and they used and on that place of the worship they used various kinds of trees, herbs, and those herbs help to cure this kind of pandemics. In North India, central part of India, must have heard Shitla Devi. Shitla Devi, another Devi emerged in the time of Chicha, smallpox. And this, you must have heard there are songs of Shitla Devi, there are songs of Ola Bibi, and this Shitla Devi temple, you must have seen in various parts of North India, in Bengal, in Pakistan, Bangladesh, different parts of South Asia, and their neem tree is very important because neem is considered antibiotic or antiviral, and this neem puja, neem ke pani se nahana, neem ke no, they all became part of the ritual of the Shitla Devi. So Indian society responded which linked with the nature, with the natural power of healing, of the natural power of creating antidote of this kind of viruses, and we respond with our research modernity. Research modernity help us in doing these things. Another goddess emerged to respond these pandemics of chichak, smallpox, and plague in South India, and that deity was called Mariamma. And you can find similar kinds of folk songs, similar kinds of herbal, a symbiotic relation with the temple and the herbs, and the similar kinds of the cleanliness, the kind of awareness of creating cleanliness through this kind of puja. We all, Indian society, responded these pandemics in this way. But we are a little agency, and the bigger agency is the globalization. And globalization created a world directed or kind of globalized directed path of development. And thus that path of development created a virus which is like a corona, which is not it being tempted by us. But people responses and people response, the way people perceive this awareness and the kind of relation which they create with their nature, with their environment, they will help. They always help to in the fight of in the war against these pandemics, and people fought it. Earlier, a state used to fight against these pandemics, but people also create their own domain to contest against this kind of pandemics or viruses. But this time, what is happening? Only a state is fighting against the virus. We see that this is the role of a state. No, the state will do. Why Modi is not doing? Why Flana is not doing? This state government is not doing, and people are not seeing their role in that. Earlier, people had a role in that. So people as an agency in the war against coronavirus, we need to strengthen, and we will strengthen when we will work as an agency. And you know, middle class, we are all becoming middle class day by day, and middle class always lose its agency, and agency always become part of the poorer, subaltern, and people who are sufferer, who are vulnerable. No? They can work, they used to emerge as an agency. Hopefully, these migrant laborers, not today, maybe tomorrow, they can emerge as an agency. Or the rural poor or the rural people, they may emerge an agency, and they can create a lifestyle, a life culture, which may help us to counter these kind of viruses. Friends, we need to be with the viruses, not only corona, because we are entering in the age of pandemics, because this modernity has created सर्वग्रासी संकट, इसको हम लोग कहते हैं हिंदी में, एक सर्वग्रासी संकट खड़ा किया है, और ये सर्वग्रासी संकट एक लंबे समय तक अलग अलग तरह से पैंडेमिक्स एपिडेमिक्स के रूप में आता रहेगा. तो अब सोसाइटी का नेचर पूरी तरह से बदलने जा रहा है, और वी हैव टू बी हैबिचुअल टू रिस्पॉन्ड to the pandemics, and we need to understand that we are not merely biological world, because what happened in this corona war, what we observe, you must have read a very interesting theoretician, a campaign. He's Foucauldian, and it talks that what this corona has created is the fear, and that fear made us इनह्यूमन. हर इतना इनह्यूमन इस भय ने बना दिया है कि हम अपने लोगों से ही डरने लगे हैं. हर का बॉडी एक बायोलॉजिकल बॉडी हो गया है. ये माइग्रेंट लेबरर्स, दोज हु आर ट्रैवलिंग, हम लोग उनको ह्यूमन के रूप में देख पा रहे हैं क्या? हमें लग रहा है कि वो एक देह है जो चल रहा है, एक बॉडी है जो, हम सब एक बायोलॉजिकल बॉडी में बदल गए हैं. एंड वी हैव लॉस्ट आवर जो सोशल सेंसिटिविटी, ह्यूमन कंसर्न, and that is happening not only in India, everywhere in the world, and theoreticians are criticizing and critiquing these processes. So here we need to be cautious and to always recover our lost humanness, which is being lost in the war against viruses, because when we fight war against viruses, we always fight in the frame of the medicalization, the politics of medicalization. Now we are losing it, and we need to retain it, recover it. हमें अपने ये जो lost मानवीय मूल्य हैं, उनको तब्दील हो जाए, एक ह्यूमन बॉडी में भी तब्दील के मीनिंग को हमेशा जिलाए रखें, जो हमारे प्रबोधन पुरुषों ने, प्रबोधन के पंथों ने, हमारी देशज आधुनिकता ने, हमारे संतों ने, हमारे ज्ञानियों ने, हमारी जो ओरल लिटरेचर है जिसने हमें सिखाया है, हम उसको जिलाए रखें. मुझे लगता है मैं यहीं पर आई एम गोइंग टू स्टॉप हियर, एंड इफ यू हैव एनी फर्दर question or comment or interaction, I would love to respond. Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me. And I'm sorry that sometime I lost communication with you and not able to audible. But this is not my fault. This is fault of the this form which Corona has produced for us. The way I told this Picasso story. So here I'm going to stop. Thank you, Diptiji. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, sir. It was a very thought-provoking talk, and you have very elaborately explained the process that how epidemic transfers from one place to other, and what are the driving factors that is making all this happen. And you have also highlighted that how the society has responded to this pandemic situation. And in this talk, you have left all of us with a question that now it is the time that we have to ponder over the issue of modernity that has affected our life tremendously. We have questions from our participants. The first question is from Meena Pandey from Hyderabad. What could COVID-19 and lifestyle changes mean for tackling climate change? I'll repeat the question, sir. What could COVID-19 and lifestyle changes mean for tackling climate change?
Human, when the man will become little less selfish, then the relationship with the man and the society and social resources will be a bit balanced, and that will affect the climate change also. So climate change, pandemics, our social habit, or our has a close relationship, have a close relationship. We need to redefine it in the time of COVID-19 situation. And this COVID-19 situation is teaching us or giving us lesson that please redefine your relationship with your own environment, own other stakeholder of आपके आस-पास की दुनिया के साथ अपने संबंधों को please redefine.
Thank you, sir. The second question is from Dr. Mahendra Pathak, Saket PG College, Ayodhya. His question is, उत्तर कोविड-19 काल में क्या सामाजिक आर्थिक समानता और हमारे सनातन मूल्य मनोभाव की ओर बढ़ेगा? क्या ऐसी संभावनाएं हैं?
देखिए महेंद्र जी, मुझे लगता है कि ये जो कोविड-19 है, इसने कई चीजें ऐसी हमें सिखाई हैं जो पहले के अनुभवों को उलट देती हैं। जैसे इसने कहा कि पहले हमारे यहाँ कास्ट हायरार्की के बारे में चर्चा होती थी कि हमारे यहाँ अनटचेबिलिटी कास्ट फ्रेम में था बॉडी, लेकिन अब इसने कोविड-19 ने हमें सिखाया कि बॉडी टू बॉडी, सोशल डिस्टेंसिंग, बॉडी टू बॉडी, कास्ट के it should be horizontal, not vertical. It should not be on the caste line. It should be on biological line. So we are transforming ourselves. हम लोग अपने को एक तरह से बायो पब्लिक में बदल रहे हैं। हम लोग एक कास्ट पब्लिक से बायो पब्लिक में बदल रहे हैं। हम लोग मतलब एक सेक्शन ऑफ अस जो कास्ट में बिलीव करता है वो अब एक बायो पब्लिक में बदल रहा है। लेकिन बहुत सारे ऐसे मूल्य जो हमारी परंपरा ने सिखाए हैं, वो सनातन परंपरा के हो या और भी परंपराओं से आए हों, उनका बहुत वैल्यू हो गया है इस समय। आप देख रहे होंगे कि जो लाइफ स्टाइल में सफाई का कितना महत्व था हमारे गाँव में, हमारे जो धर्म परंपरा में मंदिर में जाने के पहले कितनी सफाई की जरूरत होती थी, मंदिर की कितनी सफाई होती थी। अब वो सारी चीजें हमारे लाइफ स्टाइल से खत्म हो गई थी, अब वो फिर से रिकवर, फिर से लौटेंगी और हमें बहुत सारे हमारे मूल्य जिनको हम छोड़ चुके थे, हो सकता है इम्पोर्टेंट हो जाए। मैं ये नहीं कह सकता हूँ कि होगा ही, क्योंकि आदमी का बदलना, आदमी को में परिवर्तन बहुत लंबा समय लगता है होने में, लेकिन फिर भी उसकी प्रक्रिया शुरू हो गई, मैं इतना ही कह सकता हूँ।
Third question is from Dr. Ritu Sharma. Her question is, will there be a metamorphosis of human understanding post COVID-19 after witnessing the clear skies, water and earth? Will we redefine our existence with strict policies?
Yes, I think this COVID-19 gave one very big message for all of us, that rethink and redefine. This main crux of the main crux of the culture which is going to be produced after the post COVID-19 situation, that is based on rethinking and redefining, and that is rethinking and redefining in various spheres, various spheres, in various kinds of relationship, in private industrial sphere, in private sphere, in governmental sphere, in religious sphere, in cultural sphere. Everywhere we need to rethink and redefine your entire rehauling, overhauling, अपने को फिर से सोचना, ताकि आगे के समय के लिए we need to prepare ourselves, because in the future we have to face high.
So next question is by Vinay Pandey. Changes created by COVID-19 may change our whole lifestyle forever. Will the changes created by COVID-19 may change our whole lifestyle forever?
No, I can't say forever, because देखिए human जो this is the human tendency when they are in a crisis situation, they change their lifestyle. But when they will be comfortable, again they can try to live like a very prosperous, affluent, comfortable consumer, the kind of lifestyle which we had in age of globalization. वैसे ही 90 के बाद देखिए, the two very important changes which we have observed. One is globalization, liberal economy, introduction of liberal economy after 90s, and second is this pandemics. हमने एक मोशन, गति, उपभोग की पूरी संस्कृति जो हमें मिली 90 के बाद, पेंडेमिक्स ने आके कहा नहीं, इसको रोक. बट ये तब तक रहेगा जब तक इसका भय रहेगा हमारे साथ. When the bhai will disappear, again maybe we return like a sponge, जैसे होता है, फिर से वहीं पहुंच जाना. But काफी कुछ बदलेगा, many things will be changed in this process. तो एक mixed lifestyle maybe will lead in the future, that is mixture of globalized human being, globalized human, and also post-COVID human. दोनों के mixture से एक नया मानुष बन सकता है, and we expect that moral part of human society will again re-emerge, क्योंकि जो मृत्यु का भय है कई बार हमें अच्छे रास्तों पे ले जाती है, और ये मृत्यु के भय के साथ हम जी रहे हैं.
So next question is from Dr. Shalini Pathak, Lucknow University. How far is it feasible to say that colonial disposition is still existing and has influenced our society tremendously?
It may be partially true. It is partially true that colonial hangovers are here. Colonial habits are there. Colonial structures are there. But now we have traveled a lot from the colonism. Colonism was the beginning, but we came to the globalization, which is another kind of climax of the life philosophy which emerged through colonism. And this makes us very self-centered, selfish middle class, selfish affluent section, selfish affluent community, and so colonism is one debate. But now this debate is moved, which started from colonism, but it reached towards globalization produced, consumerist human being, and which is very dangerous proposition.
Sir, there are so many questions that is being posted by the participants. I'll just take up one last question. It is from Dr. Vinita Mishra from Allahabad. क्या COVID-19 इंडिविजुअलिज्म की थ्योरी को बढ़ावा देगा?
इंडिविजुअलिज्म ये हो सकता है कि COVID-19 के बाद हम बहुत एक तरह से इंडिविजुअल बीइंग के रूप में अपने को परसीव करें, और वो इंडियन लाइफ स्टाइल विच इज वेरी मच बेस्ड ऑन कलेक्टिविटी एंड शेयरिंग, उस पर थोड़े शॉक्स, थोड़े रप्चर, थोड़े खतरे खड़े हो जाएं। लेकिन जैसे ही सोसाइटी खुलेगी, मुझे नहीं लगता कि ये इंडिविजुअल इंडिया में रहेगा, वो खत्म हो जाएगा। अभी आप देख रहे हैं सुगम सरकार कानपुर में कल परसों का देहांत हुआ, 5,000 लोग निकल गए। You can't find this thing in Italy. You can't find this thing in America. Indian society can't survive as an individually individual made society. इसमें एक इंडिविजुअल तो रहेगा, लेकिन एक कलेक्टिव इसका हिस्सा बना रहेगा, ऐसा मुझे लगता है।
Thank you so much, sir. So one question is there from one of the participants from Maharashtra. I feel that this question is quite relevant, so I just want to ask this one last question. After that, we'll finish this question session. The question is from Shankar Virajtarji from Maharashtra. His question is, post-COVID-19 will give jolt to globalization. Means deglobalization encouraged towards Gandhian environmentalism.
बिल्कुल, मुझे लगता है इस प्रश्न का सबसे अच्छा उत्तर समीर देंगे, बिकॉज समीर गांधीयन है। लेकिन मैं आई वुड लाइक टू से दैट दिस कोविड कोरोना is a counter of globalization, and it is saying that trust in yourself. अपने मैं ये नहीं कहूँगा आत्मनिर्भर तो एक नारा हो गया है, लेकिन मैं कहूँगा कि वो अपने एक तो बाउंड्री को जो ब्लर्ब हो गया था ग्लोबलाइजेशन के दौर में, उसको स्ट्रॉन्ग करेगा। नेशंस और स्ट्रॉन्ग होंगे, अपने रिसोर्सेज बहुत महत्वपूर्ण हो जाएंगे। वी विल एक्सप्लोर आवर रिसोर्सेज which will lead to the Atmanirbhar society also. Or Gandhi is very relevant in the war against viruses, in the war against pandemics. और गांधीयन लाइफस्टाइल पूरी तरह से तो लौट नहीं पाएगा, रिकवर नहीं होगा, but Gandhian values and philosophy and morals maybe that will come with our modernity, and that will mix with our modernity. Then we can develop an Indian form of modernity, and that will help us to live a life with various kinds of differences. क्योंकि उनके साथ आपको रहना होगा, रहने के लिए एक जीवन शैली होनी चाहिए और एक जीवन दर्शन होना चाहिए, and that जीवन दर्शन एंड जीवन शैली ग्लोबलाइजेशन पे बेस्ड नहीं होगा, वो हमारे अपने देशज जो वैल्यू और जीवनचर्या पर बेस्ड होगा। आप देखिएगा बहुत सारे लोग जो पहले बाहर जाते थे, अब देखिए पहले विदेश जाना कितना अच्छा माना जाता था, अब विदेश जाना कितना खराब माना जाता है। अरे विदेश से आए तो मत छुआओ उनसे। परदेसी और विदेशी ये दो शब्द पहले अच्छे थे और वो शब्द इतने खराब हो गए। तो दिस पैंडेमिक्स इज गोइंग टू चेंज द एंटायर paradigm of society and life, and we have to be part of that. Gandhism is going to play a very crucial role in this war.
Thank you so much, sir, for so patiently attending all the questions and clearing all the doubts and queries of our participants. Thank you so much, and I really regret for all those participants in cases where I was not able to take up the questions, because we are running out of our scheduled time. Now, I'd like to request Dr. Dipti Pandey to invite and introduce our next speaker, Professor Erach Bharucha ji, who is Director of Bharati Vidyapeeth Institute of Environmental Education and Research. Dr. Dipti Pandey.
I'm now in the process of introducing you to Dr. Erach Bharucha, who's the Director, Bharati Vidyapeeth Institute of Environmental Education and Research, Pune. He is indeed a very versatile person. A surgeon by profession, Dr. Bharucha has been active in wildlife and nature conservation for nearly 50 years. A well-known wildlife photographer, he has traveled and studied Indian national parks and wildlife sanctuaries all over the country for 3 decades. And he has been a number of numerous prestigious bodies and forums like the Natural History Society, World Wildlife Fund for Nature, and Wildlife Institute of India, and the Central Zoo Authority. And he's also worked in conjunction with certain government bodies, giving his expert advice and specialized opinion on conservation-related matters. A pioneer of environmental education in India, Dr. Bharucha was awarded the Earth Hero Award for the year 1914. And this I came to know just a short while ago when I was just looking up some content and I came across this news, and I was so elated that I will be sharing this with all of you. And this was given by the Royal Bank of Scotland. He has shared this with some other people who are working in the area of environmental conservation. He has, to his credit, a number of books and other publications. Two important ones which came to my notice were The Biodiversity of India and Abundance of the Indian Wilderness. In fact, I was so taken up by this, the cover page of this book, Indian Wilderness, that there was a strong compulsion to just flick over it, but time constraint was there. I'll be doing that later on. He has consistently taken a very keen interest in promoting environmental education in schools and writing books to facilitate that. He has written quite a few books, as I was told, for students at various levels in school education. And over and above, my personal experience with Dr. Bharucha has been fantastic. Knowing him only during the course of this webinar, when I was talking to people, discussing with people, and I found him to be a very cordial, very cooperative, and a very genuine human being. Considering the vast range of achievements which he has to his credit, he is very, very down to earth and a very simple person. And I'm really appreciative, and I want to share this with you. So, and we are, and personally, we're looking forward to his presentation, which I'm sure will be as effective as he is as a human being. So now I invite Dr. Bharucha to take over, and when he indicates, we'll be running the PPTs as per his instruction. So, Dr. Bharucha, it's there for you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Pandey, for inviting me for this. And this topic was very special to my heart, and it was very surprising that you could pinpoint on this and ask me to talk about this to this very august audience. I think the first thing that I'd like to do is to tell you how I would like to structure this. I'll start by talking a little bit about the conservation aspects of post-independent India, as you have asked me to do. I will then go into a few aspects of individual species or ecosystem conservation that have happened in this country. I will also talk a little bit about the current status of conservation, and finally look at this from the perspective of COVID, which I have now started saying that we are not in the Anthropocene anymore. We are in a virocene. And that this is something which is very strange, that we are moving out of the control of the earth which we had and which we misused into an era which a virus is really controlling. It's something very, very scary when you think of it from that sense. I would also like to tell you that when you ask me to talk about milestones, actually this is a mix of governance, implementation, legal support, and very much more about public participation, which we now refer to as CEPA, communication, education, public awareness. All this leads to biodiversity conservation. And we need all these four pillars to be able to make conservation happen. If you look at the wildlife angle of this COVID has changed so many things in a very short time. So I'll bring that up at the end of today's talk. And it's something very fascinating, which has shocked me after my 40 years of looking at wildlife, which I never expected to happen. But irrespective of how we look at it, if we look at the change that has happened, it has been so very rapid that it's very difficult for us to even absorb. I would, of course, like to say that we have a very strong, long history of conservation in India, very strong ethic. And this comes from a long, it's a continuum in history with little bumps that arise in time. And those little bumps are often caused by individuals, by people, or by events that happen. So I'll try to very quickly go through some of these movements which have happened in the last 30, 40 years. But I'd still like to say, in a very brief way, a bit about the long history of conservation ethics in India. So may I have the first slide, please? The first slide really refers to a long history of pre-independence India, where we talk about Vedic literature and mythological evidence of conservation. We have had a very, very strong influence from Buddhism and Jainism. And we also find that we have a lot of the same sort of things that we are thinking of today. Are you getting my slide, Dr. Pandey? Yeah, there you are. So just go to the next one, please. Not for me. Yeah. So here you have this pre-independence thing. One thing that I'd like to bring up very strongly, which I always talk to about my students, that the IUCN didn't create this whole thing about species and saying that certain species are more important than others. Ashoka had a list of species which he had banned from his table in the 2nd century BC. So we're not doing anything new. We are repeating something that Ashoka said 2nd century BC. We also had royal shikaris and who created their own hunting reserves. And if you see to the reserves, out of the 50-odd tiger reserves, a very large percentage are old hunting reserves of the Maharajas. And then we had these fabulous Mughal artists, who actually many of them came from Iran, who drew flora and fauna and hunting scenes all the way back in the Mughal period and actually depicted Indian flora and fauna much better than the Westerners ever have done. Next, please. Yeah, can you go to the next one? I think in independent India, the 50s and 60s wasn't a very exciting time for conservation because we were concerned with poverty, we were concerned with agriculture, and bioresource management really went into a huge over-extraction at that period. But then we come to a period where we start seeing the Wildlife Protection Act coming on, and then even organizations like the Bombay Natural History Society and the famous conservation scientist Dr. Salim Ali, who actually spearheaded many movements within the government of that period. In the 60s, in fact, some of the acts that came out later, such as the Wildlife Protection Act, actually drafted the Bombay Natural History Society. Then we come to this period where we see our national parks and sanctuaries beginning to emerge. The first one being Kaziranga. And the story is that there was a tea planter called E.P. Gee. Gee took Jawaharlal Nehru on an elephant and showed him a rhino in Kaziranga and said, Prime Minister, if you don't look after this place and if you don't make a sanctuary here, you will lose your rhino. And that's how the Kaziranga came about. At the same time, Corbett was writing stories about tigers and tigers that he had hunted. And Jim Corbett, therefore, went into eventually creating Corbett National Park. But you see these two different approaches that had come. One where an individual had lobbied, the other where these stories became practically part of youngsters who were reading literature in India. So these are the ways in which conservation actually have happened in our country. For example, these huge royal hunts that the Bharatpurs had organized as rulers of that wetland. And they actually had started with that wetland with the idea of using it not only for agriculture, but for wetland birds to come there. And it was Dr. Salim Ali again who insisted that government should create a sanctuary there. and therefore Bharatpur became a sanctuary. Next, please. If in the 1970s, we get this, a little before this, please, we begin to see this PA protected area network forming. And here the focus was completely tiger-centric. There's a Project Tiger in 1970s, and this whole thing became a very tiger-centric movement. But wildlife conservation, therefore, became a concern now in our country. No, please. And here, something very interesting happened. The same Maharajas and the same administrators who were erstwhile shikaris turned into conservationists. They joined the BNHS, they created the WWF, the wildlife movement in the country, and so on. And the two organizations, BNHS and WWF, now started doing conservation education programs. I think there was a huge change there. There were small programs in the sense that numbers were not very large, but they were very focused. In fact, I was a volunteer for WWF as well as for BNHS. And this changed the consciousness of many people into being amateur naturalists. So, however, with all this, the focus was on large glamour species, and nobody was worried about anything else. And this was one reason was that they were being hunted out of existence in the 1950s and 60s. And so it became a major concern for conservationists that we need to set up more national parks and sanctuaries or protected areas. Next, please. Okay, in the 1980s, you get a new sort of movement, a very, very essential movement. You get societal concerns of people, especially for those who are living around these national parks and sanctuaries, where national parks and sanctuaries actually hurt their livelihoods. And this became a very separate lobby force. So now you had two lobby forces doing more or less the same thing. And many people say it's development and conservation in this form is two sides of the same coin. I don't think it's two sides of the same coin. I think this is a balance that we need to create between conservation and development. And this is something which is very important. Around 1988, we see a very big change, a very exciting change, that this whole business of, old Maharajas reserves becoming national parks or sanctuaries, or somebody liking a particular place and being attached to this, becoming a sanctuary, altered all of a sudden in 1988. In 1988, two people, Rogers and Padwar of the Wildlife Institute of India, wrote for government planning a protected area system for India. And this changed the whole scenario of how conservation would happen after 1988. We also had a separate movement, which some of us were involved with, which was called the India Eco Development Project, where we took 8 of the recently developing tiger reserves and created for them alternative ways of income for local people who lived around them. These were the first eco-development movements that the world has ever seen. And it's really something phenomenal that so many of these things have happened in India before anybody else. In the 1980s, we see that this protected area system now begins to grow. And this is a very important thing because by 1990s, we see a focus on other types of ecosystems. So from the first setup of forest sanctuaries and national parks, we are now thinking of wetlands, grasslands, seacoast, very inadequately, I'm afraid. But then the concept that it was not only about forest is very different. And I think I've always thought that the forest department should be really named as an ecosystem development department or something like that. Because the same department that it calls itself forest department is actually in charge of wetlands, grasslands, deserts, semi-arid areas, seacoast, marine ecosystems. So they need a much more broader focus, and we need to establish that it is they who are doing this. But we also have in the 1990s a much larger lobby growing for support for local people who are living around protected areas. And therefore we get ecologically sensitive areas around protected areas, a concept that we need to understand, because if we don't have local support for these protected areas, they will all fail. And today we know this. I don't think we are doing enough for this. because local people still need much greater support for being able to be part and parcel of protected areas. Next, please. If you look at between 2000 and 2010, you know, when I started doing this kind of work, there were barely a handful of wildlife photographers in the country. And people thought I was quite cuckoo. I mean, this Parsi fellow with this crazy idea of using photographs for making people aware about wildlife. But today, there has been such a huge number of tourists going in with giant big lenses. Wildlife photography is much easier. Animals have become much more used to tourism. And this same tourism, which some of us had thought was something that would elicit support for protected areas, has become today the greatest pressure on managing national parks and sanctuaries. And of course, tiger reserves as well. And tiger reserves has become the focus of this kind of tourism. But at the same time, we now see something new happening. We had several acts which we had already passed earlier. We had the Forest Conservation Act, the Forest Rights Act, and we had more recently, 2002, we had the Biodiversity Conservation Act. So we find that these now become much more active in people's perception and the mind of even the judiciary. And the judiciary becomes a very important positive force for conservation in India. And I must say this has been unique, absolutely unique across the world. The judicial movement of wanting ecological protection, of wanting wildlife biodiversity management is something which is phenomenal. So the activation of these acts sometimes took a long lag phase. I think we very often don't realize this. Just take, for example, the Wildlife Protection Act is really very old. It's in the pre-British times, but later on it had many amendments and so on. And the Forest Conservation Act came in 1980s. The Forest Rights Act came in 2006. The Biodiversity Act came in 2002. But it was around this period of time where we suddenly start seeing that lag phase was ending, and we were actually beginning to involve more and more people in this sort of conservation lobby. I think this was a very important thing that happened around this period. Next, please. This last decade, 2000 to 2010, brought in a lot of newer thinking. One was that we cannot have these isolated protected areas as islands of biodiversity within a matrix of all sorts of other land use, agriculture, pastoralism being the traditional ones, but industry, urbanization, and so on. So I think here we have to do something which is very different, and that is, how do we corridor these protected areas through this matrix of land?
Next.
So next, please. Next slide, please. How do we corridor these so that we get a network of protected areas? The other thing is, how do we conserve several species of wildlife outside protected areas? And here I don't mean tigers and elephants and leopards and so flora and fauna that we get outside protected areas. How do we conserve this? Then we are concerned with conserving traditional cultivars of ours and livestock. India had some 60 to 80,000 varieties of rice, and most of them are gone, and they're in genetic plasms in the US and so on. We need to be able to also understand that our cultivars and livestock are as precious as our wild species. And this is so very, very important today as a future huge biodiversity asset of our country. We also have had international obligations, and I've always been telling, at least I always tell my students, that India's acts and India's policies preceded what we got from international obligations. We were already doing those things. It only strengthened our hand to do it. So contemporary ideas like the Sustainable Development Goals of Target 16, 17 is something that we've already been doing through our acts for the last 20, 30, 40 years. The newest concept, which came about also in the 1990s and later on, is that we don't necessarily have to only conserve large areas. We need to look at other effective area-based conservation measures. It's now referred to as OECMs. And this means conserving small community conserved areas. India is superb in this. We've got thousands of sacred groves, northeast, the eastern part of India, the central highlands of India, and the western Ghats. We have these community conserved areas for spiritual reasons everywhere. And if we don't look after them now, I'm afraid they will disappear. The other is this concept that even areas around protected areas are very important as ecologically sensitive areas. And these ecologically sensitive areas need a new type of thinking. Because if we try to legislate them very, very strongly, then you will get a lot of reaction from local people. How do we get local people involved in doing this? Is by seeing that they see benefit out of being in the surrounds of that protected area. And this does not mean only the tourism part of it. It has a whole lot of new strategies to take place. Next, please. Next, please. What are the current needs of conservation? I think this corridoring is very important and perhaps most important for elephants, but several other species. The other very important current need is what we refer to, see, protected areas are in situ conservation. But we also need to now look at ex situ conservation of those species which we believe are on the brink of extinction. That they must be very, very vulnerable now to extinction. And we need to do something where we breed them so that if we can and do try to rebuild adequate habitats for them, we will be able to release them back. So vultures, for example, is a good example. Great Indian bustard is an example, and I'll talk a little bit about that later. But we also need to look at loss of other types of natural ecosystems, grasslands, wetlands, coastal areas, mangroves, marine habitats, island habitats, most critically important. This is where our biodiversity rests, as I show you now. So a need for ex situ conservation has become now a very, very important thing. Next, please. I'll now take you through a list of a few visuals which will tell you why we are where we are today. And that is looking at India's biodiversity through a very small keyhole, I'm afraid. This is something that I would love to explain in much more great detail. Next, please. If you look at the global species diversity, when I made this slide not long back, it was 1.8 billion species. It is now 1.9 billion species already. But look at where the maximum number of global species lie. Nearly 50%, 52% in fact, lie in the insect world, right? Something like 17% and probably increasing lie in our flowering plants. But look at the other end of the spectrum where we have very few. We don't know about these species. We don't know enough about amphibia. We don't know about marine fish. We don't know about starfishes and mollusks and arthropods. We just don't know this. And therefore, we sometimes don't remember that these species are the ones that may be disappearing extremely fast. We don't know enough about fungi and algae. And these are the basis of our ecosystems. So we need to say, where should India focus its future conservation efforts? So while I believe that tigers are very glamorous and very important, and I love them very much, elephants have found great pleasure in the old days of chasing me at least 4 or 5 times, and I still love them very much. But there are these cryptic species which we know just very little about, which need to be focused on now. May I have the next one, please? So if you look at India, India is a mega diversity country. We stand somewhere, depending on which species you are looking at, between 10th and 13th in the world today. So we are a very important mega diversity country, and many, many of our species are endemic only to India. They're not found anywhere else, or to South Asia, let's say. So this becomes very important. But even in India, we have 4 distinctive hotspots in our country. One is the Himalayas, which have got species which are not found anywhere else. It's got very, very importantly our Western Ghats, where I come from actually. Look at all the Northeast states. the Andaman and Nicobar Islands, especially Nicobars, have got endemism which is of a very, very high order. And this is something that Rogers and Pawar brought up in 1988 by creating this map, which is called the Biogeographic Zones of India, which start from the Trans-Himalayas, Himalayas, Indo-Gangetic Plains. Then you look at the desert, the semi-arid land, the Deccan Plateau, the Northeast, and the Western Ghats and Andaman and Nicobar Islands. These 10 biogeographic zones actually tell us where we need our protected areas and what we know to do there in a very balanced way. Let's have the next one. The next one is a very celebrated sort of statement that India has 2.5% of the world's landmass, but has 7 to 8% of India's known flora and fauna. I mean, this is hugely important for us to understand. Our landmass is smaller. Our share of biodiversity is so very much higher. We have 45,000 plants, 91,000 animals, and this was in 2014, but today we have many more than this as well. So I think this is very important. Having given this background, I'd like to take you to just a few examples. We can't go into many of these examples of what sort of conservation measures we have had. I think we sometimes underrate ourselves in our country. We think of all the damage that has happened, about the loss of biodiversity, and we sometimes forget that we are a huge nation, we have poverty to look at, we have very little land for that kind of numbers of people, and yet we have been able to do conservation. And I'm going to show you some of these examples and tell you very quickly why we have been able to do that. Next, please. A very favorite species of mine is this deer that you see there. And usually when I'm talking in an audience, I usually ask, do you know what this is? And hardly anybody ever puts a hand up. This is the very rare hungal, or the Kashmir stag, which is found only in one sanctuary, Dachigam, near Srinagar. Dachigam as a sanctuary was not created for this animal. It was essentially created as a water catchment for Dal Lake in Srinagar, for Srinagar's people. And yet this was the only place where this animal has managed to survive. Now this makes it very important. One disease that this animal gets, and this species will get extinct in the world. And it's a gorgeous deer. I mean, it has these 13 point antlers, and it's a sublime deer, and perhaps one of the most beautiful deers in the whole world. So this single pocket, any animal which is in a single national park is at huge risk, and we need to always put this in. Next, please. And we have many others like that. The lion is like that. The lion is focused in the Gir, and we are not able to translocate it out for purely political and other reasons, that we are not able to put up a second home for the lion. The lions are moving out of the Gir sanctuary on their own, going into people's farms, going and eating their cattle, their buffaloes, and they're often falling into wells there. And we are not able to have the scientific knowledge used to say having a single pocket of lions is dangerous, right? The next one is a very interesting one, because it's one of the first key things that we did was we made Kaziranga into a national park in the 1950s, but later on in the 1970s and 80s, we were able to translocate successfully that animal to other national parks like Manas. Okay, so the next slide is a picture of the last 3 Siberian cranes in India. And they were in Kealadev or Bharatpur. They used to come from Siberia all the way through Mongolia and Afghanistan and Pakistan. Invariably, they were shot along the way. And finally, this is one species that we have unfortunately lost for India. The next is a success. No, let's go one above. 1 or 2 above, actually. In fact, this is one of those that has chased me, so he's quite famous. Well, a lot of the poaching that happened for ivory happened in the time of one guy called Virappan, and later on a very big person who transferred a called Satsachan. Both of them are not there, and a lot of government effort that went into doing this. The slide you see now is really about special habitats, and that is the islands that we have in the Andaman and Nicobars. Out of those islands, 100 are protected areas. And we may find that with the increased efforts of tourism departments, these very precious biodiversity that is there could get very seriously impacted, not only for the forest, but the coastal area itself with its mangroves, the marine areas with its incredible coral. So I think we need to understand, how do you make sustainable tourism happen? Next, please. So the next slide would show you coral. And then, so this is the coral in the Andamans, which we now need to very desperately preserve. Next, please. One of the biggest impacts that I see in the near future is going to happen because of this kind of plant, right? This is lantana, which you see as a small garden plant. But in our forests, it's growing up trees like that into that teak tree and destroying all the undergrowth which was native to that kind of forest. These invasive exotics, in fact, lantana was brought by a British lady as a garden plant. It's spread all over our national parks and sanctuaries today. And this is a huge, very, very huge impact on nature. The next one is again a very, very sad story. And that is 6 species of vultures, which we have nearly lost. In my childhood, I saw not just hundreds, but sometimes thousands of vultures in the skies around Pune. And today we are down to a few hundred birds, probably a few thousand birds all across India. And we lost them for a very unfortunate reason. As a surgeon, I used to use diclofenac on humans, but around 10 or 15 years ago, veterinary doctors started using this on cattle. And when they started using this on cattle and the cattle died, the vultures would eat the cattle, and they played that very important function. When the vultures ate the cattle, they began to die of kidney failure. Thousands of vultures died in a few short years. So what I want to bring out here is that one change in the ecosystem, one drug, could wipe out one of the commonest bird species in this country. I mean, just think about it. That risks are so very high when we don't know about something. Today, the BNHS has made a center, and there's 5 other centers as well, some of them run by government forest departments, of ex situ conservation for vultures. And I'm very happy to say that within the next year or two, we'll probably be able to release some of these birds bred in captivity back into nature. It's a huge, huge victory for our country, even if the numbers are still very small. Next, please. So what I brought out in these few last slides is how complex this web of life is. This web of life is an incredibly complex situation which we try to understand. And every time we dig out one secret, we get another 100 secrets to answer. And this is what has fascinated me all my life. Next, please. The other thing is, what are we going to do about our protected areas and tourism? This picture is taken in Periyar in South India, where it says boat ticket counter is right across, so you can take a boat to see elephants. But that macaque is sitting there under the board which says, "Do not feed monkeys," and he looks extremely sad about that sign. But this is what, even a macaque becomes a risk. Because when they get used to humans, they do bite. And I mean, you have to be very, very careful about this. And the last slide that I'm talking about is, next please, is that it's not hopeless. There's a lot more we can do. And perhaps the biggest thing that can happen is public awareness. If we have a proactive public awareness, we have a proactive media, we have a proactive tourism department, and of course, we have a proactive protected area managers, we have much to save, and it's not impossible. So having said that, let's go to a few last slides just to say, next please, what is the current status of biodiversity conservation? What have we actually lost? And a very famous ecologist called George Schaller said this a few years when he was called to address a seminar at the BNHS. He said, you know, you guys in India have done a remarkable job. He said, and we were all very, of course, pleasantly surprised that Schaller would say that, because he did the first work on tigers and predation and so on. And he said, you've lost the pig-headed duck. You've lost the Siberian crane. You've certainly lost the cheetah, right? But he said, you haven't lost too many other glamour species. You managed to save things under these terrible circumstances. And therefore, we need to say, what have we severely affected the great Indian bustard, vultures, and a whole lot of cryptic species of flora and fauna. But we need to change a few policies that we have. We've had these big protected areas, 800 protected areas today, to which we have added small multiple areas, which we call conservation reserves and community reserves. But we need to do this with newer ways of management. And coming to what do we not know today, we don't know, next please, we don't know about hundreds of cryptic species. We don't know about animals which have got only a single habitat. We don't know about cultivars, enough about cultivars to save them. We don't know anything about our local animal breeds, which are domestic animals. We have a lack of information on genetic diversity, and we do not know how to keep our ecosystems as intact as possible. Having said all this, I would like to bring you to COVID today. So you could put off the slide and just keep me there if possible. See, the COVID experience for me has been a very unique experience, actually, because my garden, small little garden, which where on the terrace I used to photograph birds from, in the last 3 or 4 years, the birds had become very much rarer. In a week or two, those birds which I haven't seen for 3, 4, 5 years have all come back. And I'm having a ball taking photographs about them. So this is something that this behavior change of wildlife has been a remarkable experience. Look at the number of lockdown pictures that I've got of wildlife from all sorts of people across India. Wildlife is found on our empty streets of urban areas, on highways. These are new surrogate habitats for this wildlife. They've all come back there thinking, oh, those terrible humans are not there anymore, and we can take over these areas. But look at this, how these empty streets have actually worked. They have now already seen animals which have stayed there for several days, right, or several weeks together. And leopards, for one, have done that. They've started establishing territories in areas where you don't really want them to be. This is a problem. Marine wildlife and marine mammals have come back to coastal areas, including a place like Mumbai. So I don't know what this is going to lead to. And here we need to discuss this very, very seriously as to what will happen in the immediate post-lockdown period when these animals are still in urban areas. We are going to see, I believe, an increase in human-wildlife conflict in a short period of time, at least till these animals realize that their habitat balance it has to be restored. And many times these animals, and there's this beautiful picture, going back into a national park on its own. So I believe this is going to be a serious problem. We didn't predict that all this would happen in COVID with wildlife. And nor had we predicted that the wet markets of China could give us this terrible virocene of the future. Bats and pangolins supposedly most responsible. So what is the future for this post-COVID period? I think 2 things could happen, and these are purely speculative. Many people could become more sensitive to biodiversity, climate change, and environmental issues because of this hit that we have suffered from. right? And one hopes that that would happen. Or will we go back to being what we were once over and we just begin to forget? That would be terrible, because then we would be open to another attack. So I think human nature and behavior has to be modified, has to be thought about, has to be worked on. And if we are able to do that, we will still be able to have a new milestone of India's biodiversity conservation. Dipti, thank you very much for having me here. I'm done.
Thank you so much, sir. You have very systematically explained biodiversity in a very elaborative way and in a very phasing manner, covering the period of different decades. And in the chat box, we are getting a lot of comments from our participants that it was a very well-researched lecture and very informative. And we really feel privileged that we got the opportunity that you shared with us so many experiential knowledge with us after so much exhaustive research. We have lots of questions with us. The first question is from Priyanka Singh. Her question is how Buddhist teachings can quell over our anxiety about coronavirus pandemic.
Yeah, of course there's an anxiety. I'm a very optimistic sort of person. I believe in the resilience of human beings. And I think you should never get yourself shot down by this tiny little virus. We will be able to fight it. We'll have to fight it together. It's something that multiple nations will have to look at together. I'm glad you asked this question, because many people, including many of my own students, are extremely concerned now, not only about their own lives, but the fact that they have got into a period of time which is going to be very difficult. It is going to be difficult. I don't think it's going to be easy. We might see other things. We might see resurgence of COVID. We might see other viruses and diseases coming out. I think we have to learn to take this in our stride. Human beings are very resilient. I don't need to get too worried or very depressed about this.
The second question is from Piyush Pant. The question is, post-COVID-19, would it be viruses, insects, and animals than humans changing the course of history?
I think COVID has already done that. It has to a certain extent changed the course of history, and which is why historians are so important. I mean, if we didn't understand history of this, I don't think we can move forward. The fact that historical changes have taken us through different periods of time and being aware of them will take us into newer ways of looking at the future. So if you don't look back, you can't look forward. And this is where this whole business of why are we here today? And one way that I look at history, which is very different, I think, from most historians, because I'm a novice at this, is I look back into history. I don't look from the Vedic period to now. I normally look at it, what happened before this, and before that, and before that, and before that, and before that. That makes you understand where you are today. And I once wrote a chapter for a book like this on trying to understand recapitulation of history or going back, like how you see in a movie sometimes going back into the past. And they said, no, historians won't publish this. So I think one needs to look at history today from what it was yesterday and the day before and the day before. And we will know where we have come to now. And that will make us go into the future.
Thank you so much, sir. Third question is from Meeta Garg. She is from Dosa. I have seen too much infiltration in national parks because of wildlife tourism.
Yes.
Shouldn't a limit be set on wildlife tourism too?
Of recurrence of whiteback vultures in national parks, that is the only place where whiteback vultures are now coming back. And that's because there is no diclofenac in the markets around protected areas. That's something that we have looked at. I think the more vultures that we have and the more they can spread. And vultures have such wide-ranging areas on which they forage that I don't see the growth of vultures coming back at all as an impact. I see it as a huge positive thing because they are hugely important in that ecosystem web that we talk about.
So next question is from Vinay Pandey. In the current world, every nation is running behind the economic growth on behalf of nature. India is also running for double-digit growth. So how it is possible to develop with sustainable development?
Lovely. I love that question because this is what my institute does a lot of work on. We are trying to understand how do we get education for sustainable development. It's not only biodiversity conservation, it's about pollution, it's about energy, it's people issues, it's about livelihoods. All these things which lead to the three pillars of sustainability are so very important for the common person to understand. And I believe you have to do this at school level and college level, which is what Dipti Madam was referring to. Yes, I've written textbooks and so on for undergraduates' curricula. So this is something I believe is what will change human beings into more sustainable people. I'm not saying all of us can become Gandhis. Not all of us can give up everything. But we need to look at what we can give up and yet live happy, contented lives. And that is all about sustainability is about being happy. And I think if you can be happy with what you have already achieved the first milestone in sustainability.
The next question is from Meena Pandey. The question is, lockdowns and loss of tourism revenue also created challenges for protecting wildlife. So how can we apply the hard lessons of coronavirus to biodiversity?
I'm not sure I got your question, madam.
I'll repeat the question, sir. Lockdowns and loss of tourism revenue also created challenges for protecting wildlife. So how can we apply the hard lessons of coronavirus to biodiversity?
Okay, this is about I presume you're talking about the loss of revenue from tourism. I
Yes,
think that we have learned from. Yes, we have learned that tourism, but if you look at it that way, what is the percentage of money that comes into the protection of an area from tourism? And it's very small. If you look at what is the support for local people around tourism, in only the tiger reserves, this has been of real benefit to local people. And I believe that that is inadequately managed. We need to understand much more how the forest department and the tourism department goes hand in hand in trying to understand what is sustainable tourism, what is the carrying capacity of that tourist area. And I think that has been neglected for many, many years. We haven't got enough answers for this. We don't have enough really good sociological data on this, and we don't have enough ecological knowledge to say this is sustainable, this is beyond the carrying capacity of this area for tourism. So I know this is a problem. I know we have been thinking about this for a long time. NTCA, the National Tiger Conservation Authority, deals with this today. We are trying to find ways where we can have just the right amount of tourism and also support local people around it and not have a conservation impact.
The next question is from Dr. Ritu Sharma. Being a wildlife conservationist, how do you analyze wildlife roaming on streets freely as a contradiction to human life and resurgence of home sparrow, wild boar, and many other flourishing in pollution-free, as there are so many illustrations?
Yeah, this is going to, as I said earlier, this is one of the problems that is going to emerge from this whole COVID crisis of locking down towns and cities. Animals are going to take over areas where there are no humans. The question is, how soon are they going to move out again? How soon will they get scared of people to be able to move out? I think this is a problem that we don't have an answer for because we've never seen this before. We've never seen the streets which are like, some of those terrible movies which I never used to look at, which talk about big devastating things happening in cities, and I always used to shut the TV. This kind of thing is real now. You go out onto the streets and you find nobody there. Animals are going to move in there. Leopards are already moving into areas like that on peripherals of towns. We've seen sitting on expressways. So I think, yes, this is going to be a problem. But I think it's going to be a short-lived problem. I think animals learn some of these things faster than humans do.
So next question, and I think this will be the last question because now we are running out of time. This question is from Dr. Amisha Shah. The question is, whenever we talk of wildlife, we become so sensitive towards some species, but at the same time, we use certain species for business purpose, like fisheries, etc. Isn't it a double standard policy?
Of course it is. Of course it is. Of course it is. It's just a 3-word answer. Of course it is.
So there are a few more questions on the chat box which we are not able to attend because now we are running out of time. Thank you so much, sir, for your talk.
Anybody can contact me and get through to me and ask me. I'm always willing to answer questions. Thank you very much. Shreya, thank you so very much for coordinating this so very well. I think all the people who asked these questions were already very insightful people. And they weren't easy questions to answer, let me tell you that. But I enjoyed this session very, very much. Dr. Pandey, thank you for having me here. I hope you have many more webinars and you have many more pleasant experiences like this. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. It was a very engaging lecture. And now I'll request Dr. Dipti Pandey to invite our next speaker, Shri D.O.No. Roy, and introduce. Thank you.
Now we move on to our next speaker. And all the while I was listening to you, I was being so thankful within my heart to have such a vast ranging audience, and also the speakers who are from different walks of life, different disciplines, different experiences, and a whole range of new things which have to be communicated to all of us. We now have D.O.No. Roy ji with us. D.O.No. Roy ji, when he consented to join our webinar, I was really, really happy, because this would add a new dimension to our understanding. And I've been really looking forward to listening to him. And now I'll come up with a brief introduction of D.O.No. Roy ji, so that all of you can understand that a person with a passion for things can take very, very significant and outstanding decisions in life. We had requested him to send brief, and what we got was extremely brief. It was not more than a line. And then we started looking for something more about him which could be communicated to the participants. And last evening I was frantically asking my friends, get me to some more content so that we can share with the people. But I don't think much is there on the internet, and that talks of his modesty. Now when he will talk to us, he'll be discussing with us, we'll be knowing more about his experiences and his contribution. That will make us understand how a person from the Indian Institute of Technology, Mumbai, a chemical engineer who passes out from the institute and then enters into the job arena, and after some time quits the job because he feels that this place, this system, this sort of a job, the nature of the job is not very satisfying for him. And then that was by that time we were in the 1970s. And then he ventures out, and that was the time when the student movement and student activities had really picked up, and it was quite vocal. The student community was being expressive, being vocal, and with the protests and the movements on all those things. That was his time. And then he joined the Front for Rapid Economic Advancement of India, FREA. And this was a group run by US-based Indians with the goal of developing small and medium-scale enterprises of India by providing technological inputs. Now from here, I believe that he started moving out, traveling through the length and breadth of the country, different parts of the country, the remote areas, the village areas, and that must have definitely been a very enriching segment of his life. Because during that time, he must have realized, as I come to know, that most of the development activities were micro experiments, and they were limited to small clusters of villages and sectors, there being no understanding of linkages between the sectors. Probably this intensive field experience brought him to comment in this way, and I quote him, "It was a top-down approach. Nobody was asking the people what they wanted. They were talking to the people, but not with the people." This is a very significant statement. As the situation thereafter has not improved, as we can see for ourselves, but has taken a turn for the worse in the past few decades, the significance of D.O.No. Royji's ideas and experiences is very well placed at this juncture, especially as a juxtaposition of environment and development. D.O.No. Royji is actively involved in expressing his views through his writings and talks. He's been writing for the Wire also, just came to my knowledge today. And people who write for such path-breaking resources definitely have a mind of their own. And we therefore eagerly look forward to hearing him. D.O.No. Royji, please, you're welcome.
Okay, thank you. Well, let me first apologize for being here as what they call a stepney. हर गाड़ी में एक पांचवा पहिया होता है और जब एक पहिया पंचर हो जाता है तो then they use the stepney. So I believe I'm here as a replacement for Dr. Ravi Chopra, and it is unfortunate because you would have probably learned much more from him. Let me try and contribute what little I can to this discussion. I will start with what have we learned from environmental history, and I will just do a sort of different presentation from what has been offered earlier. I don't do this as a contestation. I'm not arguing. I'm just saying that this may be a different way of looking at environmental history. And in that context, Dr. Bharucha mentioned something very interesting. He said that there are 40,000 plant species, 90,000 animal species, and there is this richness of diversity. There is a historical record that talks of the first Englishmen who arrived. And when they arrived, in their memoirs, as well as in the notes that they were sending back to the home country, they were full of wonder and amazement because they had never seen such biodiversity ever before. In England, the largest animal is the stag. And here they got to see the tiger, the lion, the elephant, creatures they'd never seen before. In England, in a temperate zone, the forest has maybe 7 species. And here you have at least 400 of the large ones, the large plants. So obviously they were thunderstruck and awestruck with wonder, and they started documenting. And this documentation is still available. It's not available here. It's available in London. where there was one man who sent out an order through the India office to all district magistrates and munsips saying, whenever you hear of a new plant, a new animal, just make a picture of it, draw it, list down what it looks like, what it can be used for, what local people think of it, and send it to me. And that is how eventually the biodiversity of this country was documented, as they say, in the British annals. Now, that does not mean, obviously, that documentation did not exist in India earlier on. It did. It was verbal. It was captured in stanzas, in poetry. It was never there as this kind of a systematic documentation. So environmental history, in a way, teaches us that documentation plays a major role. So the forms of knowledge that you use very often are responsible for how we view these animals, these plants, and for what purpose. And this documentation that was inspired by the early British settlers was very much to do with how to use these, as they called, resources. Before that, there was no word like resource in the Indian languages. We've invented a new one called Sampada, but earlier it was not known that one was a resource. So environmental history changes language. It changes the way we look at things. I will not dwell more on the colonial period, but I'll come to the period since 1947 or 48, when we became independent. And my theme in this environmental history would be that there are always two ways of looking at the same phenomenon. So there's a contestation, there's a conflict. It's not that we all think that the lion or the tiger is a very great animal. It's not true. In fact, they were called vermin at one time. And the Worldwide Fund for Nature was in fact set up by all the big hunters who were princes or kings or of the royal family, who were seeing that their prey, the animals that they shot, were disappearing. And that's how they set up the WWF, essentially to protect what they had been destroying for years. Princes who had shot 400 tigers were suddenly at the forefront of conservation. So how shooting animals with a gun changes to shooting animals with a camera has a lot to do with how you begin seeing that. So I'm trying to make a point that there's a contestation on environment, and it's been there for a long time. And now I'll give you 4 examples of that very quick. The Forest Conservation Act was mentioned in the middle. What was not mentioned was the whole joint forest management scheme that was developed, and then subsequently the Forest Rights Act. Because suddenly the Forest Act begins to recognize the fact that communities are responsible for protecting forests. So a role that was adopted entirely by the Forest Department earlier changes. And why does it change? Essentially, if you go back to the roots of it, it goes to the Chipko movement. The Chipko women in Uttarakhand, in their search or in their struggle to protect their community forests, launched the Chipko movement. And it is in that process that it came to worldwide notice that communities were in fact protesting forests. And from whom? They're protecting them from the Forest Department. So that is why the Forest Rights Act eventually has come into being 30 years later after the struggle of the Chipko movement. And now you will see that once again forest rights are being extinguished. Step by step, the various rules are being changed so that community management of forests is again being ignored. The same thing may be said of the Right to Information Act. Many of you would know that the Right to Information Act came out of the struggle of the peasants and the landless laborers in Rajasthan under the MKSS, that is the Mazdoor Kisan Shakti Sangathan. And it came because of the nature of drought. And they had to struggle first to get famine declared because of the famine code. Once that was declared, various famine works were opened. And once that happened, they found they were not getting paid properly. And that is how the struggle began for revealing the muster roll, the roll which contains the details of who was being paid for how much work. And once they got hold of the muster roll, they were able to hold revenue officials responsible and accountable for non-payment for work that was done, and very often of payment for work that was never done. And that is how eventually the Right to Information Act comes into being, as more and more communities start struggling for this right to get the information from government so that they can contest it, they can challenge it. And again, you will see in the last 5 years in particular, how the Right to Information Act is gradually being eroded. Everybody has heard probably of the Narmada struggle against large dams. Prior to that, there was the Silent Valley struggle in Kerala. And the Narmada struggle over years managed eventually to get the major instrument of managing the environment into place, which was the EIA, the Environment Impact Assessment. Because prior to Narmada, and this is historical, that there was no attempt to assess what were the damages and what were the benefits from large dams, except what the British had organized years ago, which was called the benefit cost ratio. But the benefit cost ratio never included the environmental or the social aspects until the Narmada movement brought into being the EIA. And once again, I'm sure many of you know that in the last particularly 4 years, the EIA has step by step been weakened, been loosened, and it's once again becoming an economy which is investor friendly, and therefore the investor can get major relaxations from all kinds of environmental precautions. And the third is, of course, Bhopal. The fourth, sorry, is Bhopal, the gas release in Bhopal, MIC. Just around the same time, there was also the gas release in Delhi from the oleum factory of DCM. And as you are probably, some of you may be aware, there has recently been a huge gas release in Visakhapatnam from Hindustan, what used to be Hindustan Polyolefins. These gas releases, particularly Bhopal, eventually put into the framework of law the Environment Protection Act with its major safeguards as to how you treat industrial disasters, how you must put safety in place right from the planning stage and so on. And the EPA today is again on a back burner. The current Environment Ministry has very clearly stated that environment is important, but not as important as investment. Investment is the critical element that the Ministry of Environment is looking at. So these 4 examples, and there are many more, will serve to explain that there's a continuous contestation on environment. दोनों के बीच में हमेशा एक झगड़ा चलता रहता है कि इसको बचाएं या इसका उपयोग करें. So this fight between conservation and usage has been historically a very long fight. Sometimes one side wins and the other side comes back and takes over. And we can see this again and again right through this entire independence period. And if people want to look at it, it's there in the colonial and pre-colonial periods also. Now, from that, I come to the next thematic, which is how has COVID-19 brought about changes in our view of the environment. Some speakers have said that COVID-19 is responsible for the situation, the environmental situation that we find ourselves in. I think this is a wrong statement. We need to revise that statement. Let us think about it. Is it COVID-19 which is responsible for us all being locked up in our houses and the wildlife wandering around on the roads? Is it COVID-19 which is responsible for cars having been removed from the roads and therefore now the skies are clearer, the pollution levels are less? Or is it our response to COVID-19 that is responsible? Was lockdown the only responsible available, or there are other possible responses? And this is essentially rooted, this thinking of treating the virus as an enemy is rooted in a certain pattern of thought which treats nature as an enemy. So if you treat nature as an enemy, then obviously you're always going to talk about fighting COVID, about defeating COVID, and so on. And this is a language that therefore conditions our thinking. I would sincerely request some of you to rethink this position, that are we fighting with nature or should we learn to live with nature? Which of the two positions is important? And it's precisely the opposition between these two positions that are responsible for the environmental struggle. Now, some people have referred to colonization having changed the nature of our thinking. Well, let me also talk about the very ancient literature we have in this country, which is the Vedas, which is what we have in Shruti and in Smriti, which we have in our Purans. You know, in the Ramayana, what was our response to nature? It was that the Mahants would call in the young princes to burn down a forest, because the forest was regarded as being hostile. Many people are very fond of the Shanti Parv. Now, what does the Shanti Parv says? It says peace, peace, and peace again and again. So you call upon things to be peaceful, not when they are peaceful. If a child is quiet, you don't tell the child, be quiet. It is when the child is noisy that you tell the child, be quiet. And the same thing is there with peace upon nature. You talk about like that when you don't want nature to be hostile to you. So there is an underlying assumption of how we treat nature from very ancient times. We have cited, of course, the Buddhists. Please also recall that when was there a change in heart in Ashok? It was when he had murdered about 100,000 people in Kalinga. It was the sight of those dead bodies that suddenly made him realize that there is some problem here, and therefore there is also a tension between Sanatana Hinduism and Buddhism. There is some perspective on this idea of COVID-19. Now there are two schools of thought in this as far as how COVID-19 came into being. One has already been mentioned, that is that it was the consumption of bats and pangolins in the Wuhan market. And essentially that is how the virus jumped from wildlife to human beings. And this jump was essentially because the manner in which the Chinese people had begun to consume wildlife on a large scale, and it was the market that was responsible for the spread of COVID-19. Now, this is only one school of thought, and obviously it's a popular school of thought because it's been publicized widely. There's another school of thought, and you'll find it if you go into the literature. This school of thought says that the Wuhan laboratory, there's a laboratory in Wuhan, it's a government-owned laboratory, was had been outsourced research by the military in the US, and it is one of a number of laboratories which was doing research into viruses, which was sponsored by the military in the US, essentially to discover new weapons of war, how to make viruses jump from one species to another, how to intensify the impact of these viruses on humanity. And the reason partly for that was that there is a huge industrial complex, which is the pharmaceutical lobby behind the military, of finding the cure for the virus. So if you look at the military industrial complex, one for the purpose of waging war and the other for the purpose of manufacturing vaccines and selling them for a profit globally, then you have a completely different view of how the virus came into being and how then it escaped from the Wuhan laboratory and spread. Now, depending on which of these two explanations is regarded as being more logical, more sensible, more political, if you like, then the response to COVID will also be different. Because if it is the former, which is that it is consumption by human beings, then we will talk about, is a change possible in our consumption habits? Can we stop doing this depredation? Can we stop eating wildlife? Can we stop eating meat? Can we go back to vegetarianism? And so on and so forth. If on the other hand, the virus does not come from there, it comes from research which is guided by military and industrial objectives, then actually we are pursuing a very different line of thought. And it is not consumption that we ought to be pursuing, but it is in a sense production. What is being done in the field of manufactures, why? And in the second facet, I forgot to mention that vaccine making has now become a global enterprise, and it is monopolized by the Bill Gates Foundation, which is why you will find the Bill Gates Foundation is sponsoring virtually all the medical research into COVID at the moment. Now, depending on which of these, therefore, one chooses to believe, whether we are fighting viruses because they are produced by our consumption lifestyle, or we are fighting viruses, as they call it, because it is a weapon that has been developed by a particular combine, will depend on how we respond to it. And just to end that line of argument, I would add two perspectives for all of us to think about. One is, at least in India, the COVID phenomena is not just a phenomenon of health. There is a communal element to it, which is why we are calling physical distancing as social distancing. The two words are very different. Physical distancing is keeping yourself separate from the other person because you don't want to get infected or you don't want to infect the other person. So there's care and concern involved in it. Social distancing is something very different. It's you regard the other person as not being of the same society as you. So in a sense, it's a reflection of something we ought to have left behind many years ago, which is the caste system. And in addition to the caste system, there's the othering of the other community, which has spread this virus. So the two things seem to be going together, both the struggle with the virus as well as the struggle with communalism, and how we are going to attach that or are going to address that is a huge question. Whether the animals will come back, whether nature will come back, whether the skies will become clearer, will not depend only on whether we remain locked up in our houses. Whether the lesson is very clear. If the human beings are not there in the public realm, nature recovers. And we've learned this years ago, that if you leave a forest alone, it will regenerate. But whether we will stay away, because we are locked up in our houses is something we have to look at very carefully. And in that, we have to constantly remember that there is probably an apparatus or a social system out there whose interest it is to keep us locked up in our houses in some fashion, to discipline us, to make us obedient to whatever is being announced. In particular, the lockdown. You might be interested to know that the lockdown is not legal. It's not there in any of our laws. How it has been announced is not even there in the Home Ministry guidelines. Why the Home Ministry has been given the responsibility of what is essentially a public health epidemic is a question that you might want to ask. Why are these responsibilities being entrusted? To whom? By whom? And what is the politics underlying all this? So I will stop there, and hopefully there are some of you who will be very upset with what I have had to say and may want to raise some criticism of what I have had to say. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for your talk. And you have taken up a number of current events that is related to environment conservation and development. And also you have highlighted the conflict between the conservation and development. During your talk, there was a number of times interruptions were there, but still you have handled it and you have been very cooperative, even all the participants. And I just got disconnected for a few seconds because of the network issue. Now I'll move on to the question round. One question is there from Rohit Kumar Meena. His question is, environment protection has never been a matter of national interest. Therefore, no party has made it their subject yet.
It has been an issue of national interest. I don't quite agree with that. It depends on who is in power and what kind of constituency they have. It became, you see, for example, protect the tiger did become a issue of national interest. Protect forests did become an issue of national interest. Lots of money and government schemes were put into it. But I think Meenaji has to also ask who was behind this. What caused the national government to choose, say, the tiger as the animal to save and not some other lesser animal? Why not the sparrow? So we have some kind of understanding in our mind of what is worth protecting. You will also please appreciate that there is currently a program called Namami Gange, which is to protect the Ganga. But who is protecting the Ganga and from what? And how is that going to eventually save the Ganga? You might also know that all along the Ganga, many people who lived along the Ganga, around on the banks of the Ganga, have been removed on the argument that they were defecating in the open and therefore this pollutes the Ganga. So I would urge you to understand what are the arguments that are used to protect what aspect of nature and by whom. That it was invented for the purposes of war. Two, it is not biological because the virus is not biological entity. It's actually half it's just an RNA. It doesn't have a DNA. It's when it enters the body that it becomes a biological entity. So yes, it's a terror weapon, but it's not necessarily biological.
Sir, another question is, how will the post-COVID-19 world evolve itself?
I've heard the question. The answer, my answer is, it will depend on who is in power to say what the answer should be. There are two obvious responses to COVID-19 right now in front of our eyes. One response is by state governments and central government saying lockdown. Continue the lockdown. Do not allow people to move out of the houses. Maintain social distancing, maintain masks and so on. The other response is at the moment as I speak, I believe there are about 30 lakh people in this country who are walking home. That is also a response to COVID-19. So which one of these responses is going to decide our future is entirely up to you.
Thank you so much, sir, for being so patient with all of us. Thank you so much for your time and your very thoughtful talk. Now, I would like to invite Dr. Dipti Pandey to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Sameer Banerjee, who is a very renowned Gandhian scholar. Dr. Dipti Pandey.
Dr. Sameer Banerjee, based in Bangalore, is a Gandhian scholar and practitioner of repute. From the year 1969, he has been involved in activities related to development and change in many parts of the country, such as Tamil Nadu, Orissa, Madhya Pradesh, Andhra Pradesh, Maharashtra, and Karnataka. His involvement has been with non-formal and non-governmental sector participants on issues ranging from appropriate technology to environment, slum habitats to non-formal education, sustainable development, watershed development, and organic farming. In linking these to social transformation and transition, he has been inspired and guided by the feasibility of Gandhian thought. Amongst others, two of his famous works are Notes from Gandhigram, Challenges to Gandhian Praxis. This was in 2009, and his latest work is Tracing Gandhi, Satyagrahi to Satyarthi of 2019. It was only pertinent and the need of the hour in our exploration of environmental issues and challenges in contemporary India that we should go back to Gandhi, and many people have been doing that. They are suggesting that, they are talking about that, and search for alternatives there. I agree that no two situations are identical. No two challenges are exactly the same, but there's much to examine, much to explore, much to contemplate when we come to Gandhi's approach, Gandhi's ideas, and Gandhi's overall understanding of the Indian scenario. Thus, for this purpose, we got in touch with Sameer Banerjee ji to help us out in this respect. And definitely, I cannot thank him enough for his prompt support. Although he had a big limitation with the network connectivity, and he expressed his sorrow about it time and again. But the way he supported us, the way he's cooperated with us, from this forum, I'm expressing my heartfelt gratitude to him, and I'm requesting Shreya Pathak to take over and deliver his talk. Read it out to the audience so that all his effort which has gone into it can be put to a positive conclusion. Shreya.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Before beginning this paper, I just pray to God that there be no technical interruptions during this talk, which is basically a readout of the paper that has been given by Dr. Sameer Banerjee. The title of this paper is Post-COVID-19, A Time to Pause and Reflect. 70 years after independence, an Indian laborer in India is viewed as migrant. This laborer and family want to go home because they had not received wages and have very little to eat with no prospect of surviving. They are willing to walk thousands of kilometers to reach home. The migrant Indian, a new class caste, has only his guttery to keep or lose. For the Indian laborer, this is not new. There was a time when colonial masters took them as indentured laborers to various places all over the world. These Girmichia became migrants because they could not come back. Today, in independent India, they began as migrants only to become bonded laborers because they have no option. Today, it seems we, that is the wise politicians, pracharak, jholawala, backpackwala, social workers, segments of India are bothered, if not worried. But what are we bothered about? Migrant labor, or is it something else? We are paying at what is happening to the poor man, and of course, a pain cannot be ignored. It has to be deconstructed, decluttered, analyzed, and mitigated. All because we want to help the poor people. We have appropriated the pain of the migrant. We claim that we can relieve hapless migrant of the pain. Sadly, this new pain of mine and yours, which seems to have acquired a life of its own, is reflected pain. A migrant and our pain, although similar, is not the same. We can book an online railway ticket in Rajdhani Express. Can the migrant do so in Shramik Express? Perhaps. The migrant's problem, not my and your pain, needs urgent resolution. This term perhaps allows me a lot of flexibility, particularly as regards to obligation, authority, and accountability. This perhaps permits me ingenious entry to develop others so as to mitigate the pain, particularly in situations like what we have now. This is where Gandhi and his practice of social service and satyagraha comes in to help us handle our dilemma. And politely he does this by refusing to get into the rhetoric of same, similar, and perhaps. For him, the ultimate for Raja Fakir and the Sarvahari is self-realization, a realization which is possible only through selfless service. For Gandhi, as a satyagrahi, his aspiration was to urge people to become social-minded and less personal-centric. For him, satyagraha meant striving and living to achieve self-realization. Therefore, for him, satyagraha becomes self-realization through self-service, a shift which makes the satyagrahi a judge, a jury, and a measure of social well-being. But why did Gandhi insist on serving others as a means of self-realization? For this, we need to understand not only the notion of self-realization through social work, which is a complex process of intention, intervention, and involvement, but also the mutuality of me and the migrant in all its ordinary everydayness. Gandhi, first a migrant in South Africa, and then an intrepid social worker, a nomad if not a migrant, thought and articulated the significance of this ordinary everydayness of the Indian people. An exercise which was at peace with same, similar, and perhaps as well as obligation, authority, and accountability. For Gandhi, the understanding of one's identity covers both spiritual and the material. Therefore, self-understanding becomes self-realization. For migrant, this understanding and realization is the practice of everyday living. But for us, it is practice which, whether one likes it or not, gives actuality to same, similar, and perhaps. And this in turn gives birth to ideas such as modernization, developmentalism, technology dependence, environment, and so on. Unfortunately, these ideas tend to convert the urge for self-realization into self-recognition as identity. Who am I gets established through the ideas we profess. Social work as social realization, as self-realization, becomes social work as self-recognition profession, a transition marked by distinctiveness and a fear of transparency. The fear of transparency in turn leads to a fear of open politics and of genuine equality and equanimity.
We used to say, strange are the ways of this world. And now we have been compelled to say, strange are the ways of technology. We've been talking about technology all these years, banking upon technology to take humankind across. And now we see rampant failures of technology. And this again connects us to Gandhi, to his appropriate technology, to man at the center, to technology on the periphery, assisting man to move ahead. This, I suppose, is a very big learning experience for all of us, and especially when we came to the issue of Gandhian approach, Gandhian thinking, and we're on the point of discussing what Gandhian thought had to say on all our challenges, all our questions of existence. So that's where technology actually failed us. So it's an irony of sorts, but it again makes us look towards Gandhian solutions and alternatives. So this is where, with a heavy heart, I think we'll have to put an end to this webinar. But anyway, what we gained, what we shared for the past 2 days has been extremely meaningful, extremely significant. So, apart from this last few minutes of sad and painful experience, it was a very fruitful gathering, the coming together of curious minds and experienced persons sharing their understanding with us. And as every event has a beginning and an end to it, here we are ending on this note, but this won't be, I suppose, this won't be the end actually for us. It should be the beginning, a new beginning for us.
Namaskar. This is Dr. Sanjeev Kumar, Associate Professor, Department of History, Vasanta College for Women, Rajghat, Varanasi, presenting the report of 2-day national webinar organized by Department of History on the topic Environment and COVID-19 Challenges, Exploring Changing Dynamics in Contemporary Indian History on 16th and 17th of May. The 2-day webinar was attended by around 200 participants from UP, Bihar, Delhi, Uttarakhand, Maharashtra, Hyderabad and other parts of India. The program began with the welcome address by Principal Professor Alka Singh, who welcomed all the participants and distinguished speakers. She said that the present time is not only a period of confinement but also of transformation. The theme note of the seminar was presented by Dr. Dipti Pandey, the department in charge, who emphasized on the importance of environment, wildlife and how to cope up with the present challenge of COVID-19. She also introduced the distinguished speakers. The first speaker was Professor Shekhar Pathak from Kumaon University, who in his deliberation stated that Corona days are here to stay and has shown the limitation of modern man. This is pandemic as it has affected the whole world. He emphasized on the socio-cultural and political implications of COVID-19. Social distancing is a new type of social norm to be followed by all. A large number of literary activities are going on during this period. It's a period of creativity also. This disease teaches us to be human and also humane. Politically, it's an examination time for government and the governance model all over the world. The environmental impact is clear from various reports which says that pollution has reached a minimum level. Rivers are clean. It's time to think over equality and move from consumerism. He concluded with the famous saying of Mahatma Gandhi that the earth has everything for everyone, everyone's need, but not for even one person's greed. The next speaker was Himanshu Thakkar, coordinator SA and DRP, who clearly stated that nobody anticipated clean air, clean river in COVID-19 phase. He gave examples of river Ganga, Yamuna, Satluj, Damodar, Kaveri, all look very clean nowadays. This was never witnessed earlier. He also talked about climate change. Deforestation areas have seen greater spread of corona. Industrial pollution area are also worst affected as in USA and Europe. We should also be able to sustain changes due to COVID-19. All governments of the world wants to go back to normal, but normal was a problem as far as nature and environment was concerned. We have to think of a way out. The last speaker of the first day was Professor Salim Mishra, Pro Vice Chancellor, Ambedkar University, Delhi. He said that we have lots of expectation from future. COVID-19 was an unpredictable event which dismantled mankind. He cited two previous events of 9/11 terror attack and World War II as being major events which led to a crisis, but the world moved on. But COVID-19 is going to have a greater impact on human civilization. He opined that solidarity between nation states and will be witnessed, but within states, inter-class barriers will become sharper and stronger. He further talked about three options for policy makers in the field of medical, socio-economic and epidemiological. Government policy will play a major role in bringing the gap and move forward. The first day program ended with questions from participants which were answered by the distinguished speaker. The program was coordinated by Dr. Shreya Patel, organizing secretary of the webinar. The second day of the webinar started with Dr. Mahesh Meena, who welcomed the participants, and Dr. Dipti Pandey, the department in charge, introduced the distinguished speakers. The first speaker was Professor Badri Narayan, Director, Govind Ballabh Pant, Institute of Social Sciences, Prayagraj. In his deliberations, he stated that a change in social communication is being witnessed now. He talked about the genesis of the present crisis and its trajectories. The main factor behind present predicament is modernity and how people have used and exploited nature and its resources, leading to imbalance. Deforestation, industrialization has led to ecological imbalance. Colonialism and its exploitative economic system had its own repercussions on the environment. Corona has created a new crisis. Indian tradition, both in North India and South India, have treated epidemics as Devi or Amma respectively. Corona is a globalized phenomenon. We have to stick to social sensitivity and check the erosion of human values in the present times. Values have been the hallmark of Indian tradition. The next speaker was Professor E. Bharucha, Director, Bhartiya Vidyapeeth Institute of Environmental Education and Research, Pune, who spoke on the topic Milestones of India's recent biodiversity conservation initiative. He began from the pre-independence to post-independence, starting from 1950s, 60s to 70s, 1980s to 90s, 2000 to 2010 to 2010 to 2020. He gave a systematic review on development in conservation, biodiversity, forest, wildlife, national parks and wildlife sanctuaries, to various laws, to finally the problems which are faced by us in the present time. He stressed on the need to create corridors for wildlife animals, ex situ conservation. 4 out of 34 biodiversity hotspots are in India. They are Himalayas, Western Ghats, Northeast and Nicobar Islands. The slide show of wildlife species, island, forest, vultures, etc. was a pleasure to watch. The lecture was appreciated by many participants. He concluded with a remark that we need to introspect how to conserve and sustain our biodiversity. Lockdown has helped the environment, but we have to watch what happens in the post-lockdown period. The next speaker was Sri Junu Rao, eminent political ecologist. He began with a description of India's rich biodiversity, and even Britishers were amazed to see. Britishers started documentation of flora and fauna of India, which is very important for environmental history. He talked about conservation in post-independence era and how the focus shifted from shooting by guns to shooting by camera. He was critical of the recent forest laws and emphasized how the rights of forest communities are being eroded. He referred to environmental issues like Bhopal gas tragedy and recent gas leak in Visakhapatnam and the need to take safety measures. The main issue still today is development versus environment conservation. COVID-19 has brought a challenge and a change. The main question is, are we fighting with the nature or learning to live with nature? Our tradition teaches us to be at peace with nature. He lastly advocated that we should use the term physical distancing instead of social distancing. This period of COVID-19 is a period of discipline for all of us. The next presentation was done in absentia due to network problem. It was by Dr. Sameer Banerjee, Ghanaian scholar, and the talk was on post-COVID-19, a time to pause and reflect. In his talk, he raised the recent problems of lower class, particularly focusing on the condition of laborers who are working thousands of miles away from their home in context of the present crisis. He put up the relevance of Gandhi's philosophy and the action plan on the basis of his ideas of self-realization, satyagraha and ahimsa. He explained the concept of Swaraj and Satyagraha that still stands relevant and can provide solution to the present problem of migrant laborers during COVID-19 crisis. The 2-day national webinar was held by Department of History. The organizing secretary was Dr. Shreya Patel, who was ably assisted by Dr. Mahesh Meena, Dr. Sanjeev Kumar, and department in charge, Dr. Dipti Pandey. Now I would request my department in charge, Dr. Dipti Pandey, for a formal vote of thanks. Thank you, everybody.
Since this event was a completely new experience for us, for our history department, and for many others who are organizing online events during this lockdown period, we had to be prepared for certain unforeseen situations, and this is one of them. Nonetheless, we had been talking of challenges, and we have faced many challenges during the course of this webinar. But this event could not have been organized without a number of people, willing people, coming together, putting in their bit, giving their consent and their cooperation. First and foremost, I need to thank my principal, Dr. Alka Singh, because any head of the institution has a pivotal role when we come to organization of any event, especially when we are moving in a new direction, trying to break new grounds. So after thanking Dr. Alka Singh, I feel the heartfelt urgency to thank each of the speakers, starting with Professor Shekhar Pathak, Shri Himanshu Thakkar, Professor Salil Mishra, Professor Badri Narayan, Dr. Erach Bharucha, Shri D.O.No Roy ji, and Shri Samir Banerjee ji. These 7 speakers coming from different disciplines, they formed a very colorful tapestry and got a new life into us as organizers. When we came to the final stage of the preparation and realized that with these 7 diverse speakers covering different aspects and different dimensions, we will be able to deliver something very meaningful and something very insightful to our participants. And we have succeeded in this in a big measure, I suppose. And I suppose all our participants will agree with this view, they'll share this view. I'd like to share something with you here. Actually, we were planning a seminar related to environment much before COVID took over. But since there were so many things, especially the funding part had to be taken care of, we had not reached a culmination point when this happened. And that got us thinking that could we now convert this challenge into a new opportunity? Because funding is an issue. Getting together people from different nooks and corners of the country, good speakers, experienced speakers, is another challenge. And we felt that this webinar could probably be a solution to both these concerns. And that is how it came in our minds and it started taking shape. I was thanking Mr. Mehtab Ahmed and for his technical support, along with Mr. Raj Singh, who's been by my side for the past 3 or 4 days. And we've been struggling with these issues all this time. And ultimately, they have helped us out to fare to the best extent that we could. Now, lastly, I would just like to make a statement that if anybody is interested in Samir Banerjee's short paper, which he has sent us across, they can get in touch through the email IDs and we'll forward the paper to all of them. It was his suggestion that if there were any questions, people could email to him and he would be only too ready to answer those questions. So, taking this forward, if there are keen seekers, then we can share this short paper with them, and we can also share Samir Banerjee's email ID so that they can pose their queries and questions. With these words, I would be thanking my colleagues of the Department of History and all the other participants from different universities, different organizations, some of our old students whom I can see here, and of course, in a big way, all our speakers who joined in to make this event the success that it was. Thank you once again, all of you.